It was just over 2 weeks before the start of spring in 1928 when Evan Hayes, age 29, and Laurie Seaman, age 34, waved goodbye to their friends at Charlotte's Pass. They packed whatever they had on them, including their skis, and made their way to the summit of Australia's tallest mountain. These photos are them standing at the summit, but shortly after these photos were taken, their life would come to an end. This would make them the first recorded people in history to have died on the Australia's snowy mountains. Mount Kosciuszko is Australia's tallest mountain on mainland Australia, with its summit sitting at 2,228 metres above sea level. During the winter months, June to August, the mountains surrounding Mount Kosciuszko are covered in snow, and this snow usually stays around for another 2 months into spring. Charlotte's Pass sits over 1,700 metres above sea level. It's a ski resort and village, and it's considered to being one of the oldest ski resorts in Australia. It was named after Charlotte Adams, who was the first known female European to reach the tallest mountain summit in Australia. In 1839, Paul Edmund Strzelecki set out on an expedition with 2 others, along with 2 Aboriginal tour guides, to explore the Australian Alps. In 1840, in the summer month of February, he set off alone with his horses and made his way to Australia's tallest mountain summit. Then he'd become the first known European person to have reached this summit. He named it Mount Kosciuszko. This was 41 years before the first known European female to make the summit. When you get to the summit, you will see a plaque that was put there in 1940. Take a look how it says that it is highly unlikely that Strzelecki was the first person to climb Mount Kosciuszko. The Aboriginal people of the Monaro and groups from the southern tablelands, south coast and northern Victoria visited these higher peaks for thousands of years. They came here to feast on the bogong moths which gather here in summer. They would go into caves and scrape these moths off the wall into nets and dishes using sticks. Then they'd roast the moths, which I'm pretty sure was done over a fire. Then they would remove the scales and wings and eat them right away, or ground them into a paste. This paste would be made into moth meat cakes. The bogong moths are said to have a nice nutty flavour that was very similar to walnuts or almonds. Let me know if you try that. It was a Tuesday, August the 14th, 1928, just over 2 weeks till the start of spring. At about 10:30 AM, when Evan and Laurie waved goodbye to their group of 4 friends at Charlotte's Pass to hike Mount Kosciuszko's summit. Their initial plan was to go back to Betts Camp where they were with friends before going to Charlotte's Pass, without the plan to hike Mount Kosciuszko. So they weren't well prepared. They had no spare equipment, food or clothing. Hayes had even left his compass back at Betts Camp. The weather was fine though, and that's the thing. A trip to the summit was a possibility. The weather had been fine and warm the whole week before. Not long after, the group of 4 left Charlotte's Pass to attempt to reach the summit and to see if they can locate Evan and Laurie, but they couldn't. The 4 reached Mount Everidge, a mountain very close to Mount Kosciuszko, when the wind began to pick up and they were confronted by a giant cloud. So they hurried back without reaching Mount Kosciuszko's summit. The cloud turned into an icy blizzard with sleet cutting into their faces. Sleet forms when the snow falling reaches warm air, then it hits the cold air just above Earth's surface and then refreezes. This causes tiny ice pellets called sleet. The group could barely see anything ahead and urged each other to keep together. They eventually reached Charlotte's Pass and made their way into a red hut which was all snowed up. They had no food, and not knowing how long the blizzard would last, staying at the hut at Charlotte's Pass wasn't an option. So they made their way back to Betts Camp in the blizzard, where conditions made the trip difficult. When they got to Betts Camp, Evan and Laurie still weren't there, so panic slowly started to kick in. They rested for a little while, hoping that the blizzard would stop and they could go and search for Evan and Laurie, but it didn't stop. They went out and they stayed into the darkness and continued to make that sound, hoo-wee, hoping for a response from Evan and Laurie. But the blizzard was absolutely horrible, and they realized that if the pair weren't anywhere near them, then they wouldn't stand a chance finding directions to anywhere. The next morning, the 15th of August 1928, one of the 4 group members set off from Bet's camp back into the blizzard to summon help. They still had no idea where Laurie and Evan were. Police at Jindabyne were notified that maybe 2 people were missing and lost out into the blizzard, Jindabyne being a town off the mountains about 34 kilometers away. On the 24th of August, 10 days after Evan and Laurie disappeared and after many search attempts, including 2 air searches, searching came to a stop. Then on the 9th of September, around a month since the searching stopped, a man was returning along the road after visiting the summit with 4 young boys. He noticed a pair of skis and stocks protruding from a snowdrift about 30 meters off the road on the Etheridge Range, roughly 2 kilometers from the summit of Mount Kosciuszko. Then not far from those skis was a rock. Behind this rock was a body. The body had his legs crossed and his head leaning against the rock. He had glasses and a cap on, but no gloves. A camera case was slung over his shoulder. Leaving the site undisturbed, the man and the boys headed to Hotel Kosciuszko to notify Jindabyne police. It was the body of 34-year-old Laurie Seaman. The state in which Laurie's body and equipment was found suggests that Laurie had rested his skis, took cover from the gale force winds and snow blizzard behind the nearest rock that lasted for days. As the hours passed, hypothermia would have set in. Laurie, he would have leaned against the rock, fallen asleep to never wake again. On the 31st of December 1921, almost 1 month into summer and over 15 months since Evan Hayes went missing, his body was finally found. Attracted by the barking of their dog led 2 shepherds to Evan's body, which had been reduced to skeleton form from long exposure. Evan Hayes' skeletal body was found laying flat on his back. This photo isn't very clear, but you can see one of his skis. It's said that he took shelter from the gale force winds by staying on the lee of Mount Kosciuszko. His last act was to place his skis across each other to prevent himself from sinking into the snow when he lay down. One alpenstock, which is a long wooden pole with an iron spike tip used by shepherds for travelling on snowfields and glaciers, was said to be found beneath his head, having apparently been used as a headrest, and the other one was resting against the rock nearby. A search of the clothing failed to reveal any final message, so this was taken as an indication of the exhausted state of Evan Hayes when he lay down on the lee of Mount Kosciuszko. The blizzard that day was reported to be sleet and wet snow. It's not like extremely cold snow that remains dry on your clothes. This caused their clothes to become saturated and creating a wind chill factor far below freezing. This meant that survival was dependent on getting out of the wind. It's said that Evan Hayes most probably died around 3 hours after the blizzard started from hypothermia. We know Laurie and Evan made it to the summit because these are the photos recovered from Laurie's camera. What really surprises me about this photo is that they were able to get these photos. When you think about it, this was in 1928, where cameras like the GoPro were nothing like cameras back then. There is a hut that was built and officially opened in May 1929, just under a year after Laurie and Evan's death. It's built out of stone and was funded by Laurie's family. It was built at almost the exact location where Laurie's body was found. It was named after Laurie Seaman. It's called the Seaman's Hut, and its purpose is to avoid any more deaths. And from what I've read online, it actually has saved hundreds of people's lives since it's been built. It has 2 rooms and a foyer. It has firewood and emergency supplies of dried food which are donated there by the goodwills of fellow hikers. You may look at photos online of Seaman's Hut and think it's a very beautiful and scenic place, and it is. But the hut can be lashed by very violent storms that can last for days in a row. And it happens more often than you think, with very little to no warning at all, and it can easily end your life. Gusts of wind can be so powerful up there that they blow a full-grown adult off their feet. The fog that often accompanies these storms makes navigation very difficult, limiting your visibility by just a few meters. You may be pointing in the correct direction, but the wind, it pushes you sideways off course. In 1912, a club was established called the Millions Club. Its aim was to make Sydney the first city in Australia to reach 1 million people. Evan and Laurie Seaman were both members of this club. Now, Sydney has a population of over 5 million.